Hello, this is John Armwood on the Armwood Opinion channel, and I'm back with you today. I've been away for a little while, away from YouTube, not actually away, but I am on today because I'm upset. Let me be perfectly frank with you. I am upset about the hearings yesterday for the Supreme Court nominee, Judge Jackson, and particularly the blatant racism expressed by South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, an alleged felon, and the jerk of the Senate, the most hated man in the Senate, Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Let's start with Graham. Graham begins his questioning of Judge Jackson by violating the U.S. Constitution and asking her questions about her religious belief. That is unconstitutional. The U.S. Constitution specifically says that there is no religious test, but that's what Lindsey Graham was doing, asking her detailed questions about her religious beliefs. As Thomas Jefferson put it in his letter, very famous letter to the Danbury Baptist, there should be a wall of separation between religion and government. Lindsey Graham is not smart enough or moral enough, or both, to understand that. The First Amendment gives religious freedom, but Article 6 of the Constitution prohibits a religious test. Let me read the whole article for you. Article 6 of the Constitution reads, "All debts contracted and engagements entered into before the adoption of this Constitution shall be valid against the United States under this Constitution, as under the Confederation." And they're talking about the Articles of Confederation, of course. "This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding." Quite simply, that this is a principle that applies no matter what an individual state may say. Now we're at the key point. The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial offices, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support the Constitution, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States Constitution. This is Article 6, which Lindsey Graham violated on Tuesday, the 22nd of March, 2022. And I will play for you that violation.
I want to talk to you a little bit about family and faith, because in your opening statement and the people who introduced you to the committee, there was very glowing praise of you as a person, a good friend. You have a wonderful family. You should be proud, and your faith matters to you. What faith are you, by the way?
Senator, I am Protestant.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Non-denominational.
Okay. Could you fairly judge a Catholic?
Senator, I have a record of
I think the answer would be yes.
Judging everyone.
I believe you can. I'm just asking this question because how important is your faith to you?
Senator, personally, my faith is very important. But as you know, there's no religious test in the Constitution under Article 6, and
there will be none with me.
And it's very important to set aside one's personal views about things in the role of a judge.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I believe you can. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how faithful would you say you are in terms of religion? You know, I go to church probably 3 times a year, so that speaks poorly of me. Or do you attend church regularly?
Well, Senator, I am reluctant to talk about my faith in this way just because I want to be mindful of the need for the public to have confidence in my ability to separate out my personal views.
Well, how would you feel if a senator up here said, your faith, a dogma, lives loudly within you, and that's of concern? How would you feel if somebody up here on our side said, you know, you attend church too much for me, or your faith is a little bit different to me, and they would suggest that it would affect your decision? Would you find that offensive?
Senator,
I would if I were you. I found it offensive when they said it about Judge Barrett. The reason I ask these questions is I have no doubt that your faith is important to you, and I have zero doubt that you can adjudicate people's cases fairly if they're an atheist.
Lindsey Graham goes on to attack Judge Jackson on issues having to do with her representation of Guantanamo detainees and organizations that represented Guantanamo detainees who were being held as enemy combatants without charges or a trial. This is what lawyers do. What Graham was doing was playing pure, dirty politics. And Graham is also not the smartest man in the world, as we've seen from so many other cases. Number one, Graham tried to interfere with the Georgia elections in 2020. He called up Secretary of State Raffensperger and tried to throw out the vote count in Fulton County, the majority black county. Both he and Trump made phone calls and acknowledged making phone calls to other states trying to do the same thing. Here is the video from the Republican Secretary of State.
Because today, Georgia's Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, told the Washington Post he has come under increasing pressure from Republicans, including Senator Lindsey Graham, to throw away legal ballots. I'll quote, Graham asked whether Raffensperger had the power to toss all mail ballots in counties found to have higher rates of non-matching signatures, Raffensperger said. Raffensperger said he was stunned that Graham appeared to suggest that he find a way to toss legally cast ballots. Absent court intervention, Raffensperger doesn't have the power to do what Graham suggested as counties administer elections in Georgia. It sure looked like he was wanting to go down that road, he said. The Republican Secretary of State in Georgia says that South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, pressured him to dump legally cast ballots in a state where Donald Trump is losing by a relatively narrow margin. Now, Graham told a Wall Street Journal reporter tonight, quote, that's ridiculous. What I'm trying to find out was, how do you verify signatures from mail-in ballots in these states? I thought it was a good conversation. I'm surprised to hear him characterize it that way. Mark Elias, the lawyer who has been fighting against Republican legal challenges across the country, responded to the story saying, quote, this is both outrageous and should be investigated by the Senate Ethics Committee. And the Secretary of State, Raffensperger, has announced a risk-limiting audit, which is a sort of canvassing of the votes that will trigger a statewide recount. Now, 14,000 votes may not seem like a lot, but it is a lot in terms of recounts. It is very unlikely the recount will change anything significantly. In fact, here is what Secretary of State Raffensperger said today before speaking to the Washington Post.
When people are out there making bold-faced lies, you just have to call it out with facts. So we're basically fact-bombing them with the truth.
The lieutenant governor of your state said today that there have been no examples that he's seen of systemic fraud or improprieties, and that it certainly appears that Joe Biden is the president-elect. Do you agree with him?
Yes, I believe the lieutenant governor is correct in that statement.
Graham is and always has been a bad man. He's been a racist all of his life. Now, of course, he or suggested a black woman in South Carolina. That's the new Southern way. They always will pick someone that they think that they can control or handle as their candidate to try to shield them against the voting power of black folks. I've seen that here in Georgia. I've had personal experience with this methodology that Graham used. So this is what happens. So that's Lindsey Graham. Real dumb guy. He is a lawyer. He went to law school. Not a very good one. Not one I would have gone to. He went to the University of South Carolina. It's ranked around 92 in the country. I don't know anybody that I know that would go to a law school ranked 92. And that may sound a little bit snobbish, and I guess it is. But he's a U.S. Senator. And he showed a clear lack of knowledge of Article 6 of the Constitution, as he did a criminal interference with the Georgia election counting process. Because of his white skin privilege, he was not charged, at least as of yet. And it's been almost a year and a half. This is unfortunate, but this is America. White men in power get away with violating the law without being held accountable. America is not a just society. There is not equal justice under the law. This is a reality. Let's move on from Graham. We know he's a sleazebag. Let's go to the most hated man in the Senate, and hated by both Democrats and Republicans. He's a real jerk from Texas. He starts questioning Miss Jackson and brings up critical race theory and connects it to a school that she sits on the board of directors of, a private school. And he claims that, first of all, critical race theory is Marxist, which is not. Obviously, even though he did go to Harvard Law School, where critical race studies was pioneered as a field. He's never read the material because it is not Marxist. It has nothing to do with economic determinism. He claims it was substituting racial determinism for economic, and it does not. It talks about the interaction of race and American society, but it's not a simplistic, deterministic philosophy or an really analytical tool. And he claimed that it teaches racism, where if you actually read the books you mentioned, like he mentions Introduction to Critical Race Theory, he shows this book, which you can see in my collection, which I have read. It says they're read. And it talks about the impact of racism on both people of color. It's actually written by an Hispanic, people of color, and poor whites. So Cruz is either hasn't read the book or is just plain out lying. He mentions another book, The End of Racism. He mentions a third book, which I have read, about anti-racism. Nothing wrong with these books, but the key thing is none of these books are taught in any primary school. He lied and said that. They're not taught in any high school. He lied and implied that. They're not even taught in college. These are law school books and some other graduate school programs. Ted Cruz is a bald-faced liar.
Y'all want to see stupid? Listen to this fool talk about critical race theory.
I've never studied critical race theory and I've never used it. It doesn't come up in the work that I do as a judge.
So with respect, I find that a curious statement because you gave a speech in April of 2015 at the University of Chicago in which you described the job you do as a judge. And you said sentencing is just plain interesting because it melds together myriad types of law, criminal law, and of course constitutional law, critical race theory. So you described in a speech to a law school what you were doing as critical race theory. And so I guess I would ask, what did you mean by that when you gave that speech?
With respect, Senator, the quote that you are mentioning there was about sentencing policy. It was not about sentencing. I was talking about the policy determinations of bodies like the Sentencing Commission when they look at a laundry list of various academic subjects as they consider what the policies should be.
Okay, but you were vice chair of the Sentencing Commission, so let me ask again, what did you mean by, because that was an official responsibility of yours, what did you mean by what you were doing was critical race?
What I meant was that there are a number of, that slide does not show the entire laundry list of different academic disciplines that I said relate to sentencing policy, but none of that relates to what I do as a judge.
And then he mentions a book by small kids. He calls them babies, but in the pictures of the book, it's obvious that's small children.
When you just testified a minute ago that you didn't know if critical race theory was taught in K through 12, I will confess I find that statement a little hard to reconcile with the public record, because if you look at the Georgetown Day School's curriculum, it is filled and overflowing with critical race theory. That among the books that are either assigned or recommended, they include Critical Race Theory, an introduction. They include The End of Policing, an advocacy for abolishing police. They include How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. They include literally stacks and stacks of books, and I'll tell you two of the ones that were most stunning. They include a book called Anti-Racist Baby by Ibram Kendi. And there are portions of this book that I find really quite remarkable. One portion of the book says babies are taught to be racist or anti-racist. There is no neutrality. Another portion of the book, they recommend to babies confess when being racist. Now, this is a book that is taught at Georgetown Day School to students in pre-K through second grade, so 4 through 7 years old. Do you agree with this book that is being taught with kids that babies are racist?
Senator, I do not believe that any child should be made to feel as though they are racist or though they are not valued or though they are less than, that they are victims, that they are oppressors. I don't believe in any of that. But what I will say is that when you asked me whether or not this was taught in schools, critical race theory, my understanding is that critical race theory as an academic theory is taught in law schools. And to the extent that you were asking the question, I understood you to be addressing public schools.
He says small children shouldn't be exposed to talks about racism. Well, I'm sorry. Racism has been taught to small children for decades. Obviously, Ted Cruz doesn't know. His parents didn't expose him to when he was coming up. He hasn't done the research himself. Or he's lying, which is probably the most likely option, because in South Pacific, there's a line that my mother explained to me when I was a small child. Children should be taught to hate before the age of 6, 7, and 8. It's part of a song in South Pacific. I will play it for you. This is 1958. Ted Cruz is lying. I was called the N-word before I was 9 years old, or right at the age of 9 years.
What makes her talk like that? Why do you have this feeling, you and she? I do not believe it is born in you. I do not believe it.
It's not born in you. It happens after you're born.
You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made, and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8. To hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be carefully taught.
So yes, children are taught racism. What Ted Cruz doesn't want is any history of African Americans taught. That's who Ted Cruz is. That understand him. Ted Cruz's heritage, his parents and grandparents came from segregated Cuba to the United States. He came because Fidel Castro came to power in Cuba after the Cuban Revolution in 1959. What was the first thing Castro did? They don't like to teach you this in America. He ended segregation. Ted Cruz is a segregationist with a long heritage, family heritage of segregation. So that's why he has always attacked black people. He's always sided on the side of racist and is attacking critical race studies now. It's not complicated. These are plain and simple bad people, and there are a host of Republicans who I'm not going to go into, Hollingsworth and these other idiots that were on yesterday. They're not worth talking about. The point for all of us is that they are attacking the most qualified person to ever be nominated for the Supreme Court. There have been people equally qualified, but nobody more qualified. And this has been acknowledged by nonpartisan people across the board. We have to understand that this is the American way. This has always been the American way. Racism is as American as apple pie, and it continues to be a major factor in American politics, economics, sociology, etc. That's what we're seeing play out in the hearings. We're seeing what critical race studies talks about in the actions of Graham, Cruz, and the rest of the Republicans. And on that note, with a high level of disgust with the Republican Party, and particularly Thug Graham and Jerk Cruz, I will let you go. Resistance is not futile. If we fight, we can beat these thugs. Have a good day. And please hit the like button if you like this video. Please subscribe to the channel. Look at my video on critical race theory, which will explains in detail what it was about, who founded it, what its methodology is. And you will see how ridiculous Ted Cruz is, and you will see how evil both he and Lindsey Graham are. Have a good day.